أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, I want us to first start off by thinking of this idea, right? A lot of the times, we add this word Islamic in front of a lot of different things. So obviously for the perspective of this workshop, we're doing it in front of education. I want to try to see if there's a distinction between the idea of Islamic education and an education system that just happens to have Muslims involved in it. So again, there's a lot of discussion there. I don't want to do too much, but I think a clear, kind of superficial example might make it clear. Do you guys think that a Muslim could run a casino? Well, somebody can be a Muslim and run a casino, right? They'd be doing something haram, but they'd still be Muslim, right?
Are the burgers haram?
Yeah, maybe. So you can have a Muslim-run casino, or casino that has Muslims involved. Would you ever have something like an Islamic casino? So, no. See there, because now you're thinking in the back, okay, what does Islam mean? What are the principles involved? And for us, it's a contradiction. It doesn't work. So the same way, I want us to reflect on that idea in terms of education. A lot of the educational institutions that we think about, especially in the West, people have tried to develop something for Muslims without thinking that there might be an Islamic way of developing these institutions, right? Whether there's an actual philosophy of education, right? Islamic pedagogy, for example. So, and I'm sure obviously these two scholars here will go through that. So I want to take it all the way back to the beginning, because in order for us to get to this end result where we're thinking about Islamic education in the higher form, right, higher learning, the part of lower learning is essential too, right? Which starts at the home, which starts with Tarbiyah, which starts with schooling and everything. So I wanted to first start off by giving us some basic idea of what Tarbiyah or education happens to be. There's a lot of different definitions. I want to go through at least just one definition that's been given by Ayatollah Ali Raza A'rafi. And he's one of the ulama who's in some way gone through what we call the fiqh of Tarbiyah, right? The fiqh of educational jurisprudence, so to speak, right? So what does that mean? So, and this is my rough translation of his definition of what upbringing or education looks like. So he calls it a supportive process for a trainer or an educator that is established to create gradual transformation over a certain range of time in either the physical, mental, spiritual, or behavioral realms, which occurs through another human agent in order to acquire their human perfection and flourish and or unlock their potentials, capabilities, and also to deter and correct traits and behaviors. So that's a lot different than what we think about education normally, right? The things that at least should hopefully stick out to us with this kind of definition is there's a holistic element in Islamic education. It's not just this acquired sort of knowledge where here's some mathematics for you, memorize these formulas, here's Newton's laws, just take that information. From us being over here in the West, the general perspective that I think we've been inculcated, or if I might be so bold, I'd say brainwashed with, is this sort of modernist perspective where education is simply just a tool and a function for a capitalist system, and that's it. Meaning, your education is only valuable in as much capital that you can produce. So that's why we have this blue-collar, white-collar distinction. So education that creates blue-collar workers is naturally looked down upon for some reason. Whereas if you are produced into a white-collar industry, sometimes that's much higher education. Right? We see these people as being distinguished, for example. Why? Because they're creating more capital, whether actual capital, physical capital, intellectual capital, whatever it is. But the spiritual component doesn't exist in any of this. Well, obviously with the Islamic component, it's part and parcel, and it is the whole end goal, right? The idea is to reach this kamal, to reach this human perfection. So as we're going through this, again, our mindset is trying to think about, we're trying to get somebody involved, and hopefully to some group of individuals, not everybody, to think about higher Islamic education. So our mindset, we're trying to set ourselves up for this higher education learning. And I think would be unjust if we just assume that everybody's going to be interested in that. I mean, even think about just the hawza in general. Let's be honest, most people, if your kids came up to you and said, I want to go for higher learning, higher education, Like, okay, great. Which university? You want to do master's, PhD? What do you want to do? Oh, I want to go to the Islamic seminary. Oh, okay. Are you sure about that? Like, do you know what that entails? Like, when you come back, you might have to, the money thing comes to mind a lot, right? Even my own father, marhum, he questioned me on that too when I decided I wanted to go. Even though he respected it and he understood it, he said, I don't want you to come back and just be like everybody else and have to, kind of beg. And, it was the capital, the financial portion that hit his mind. And which I understood completely, right? It's a matter of dignity to some degree. So there's some steps that I think are missing before we even get to this idea of higher education. What kind of people, or more importantly, what kind of community needs to be created in order to get people to think and believe and support something like higher education? Whether it's institutions that are, overseas, whether it's ones that are over here, whether it's a traditional sort of seminary, whether it's a more of a westernized system, whatever you want to call it. How do you get people even thinking on those lines? And it's only going to happen if the proper preliminaries and prerequisites are set up, right? The muqaddamat. You have to have these set up. In a house or in an environment with kids that the sole goal, the sole thing, the things that are being talked about are nothing but dunyawi principles. Again, it's the capitalistic mindset that I heard, at least growing up. I'm sure many of you, if you were raised here too, it was, look, these are the jobs and these are the industries that will get you right where you need to be, meaning get you money. Well, why does that matter? Then this is how, typically a parent would trace it. You need to get good grades in school, right? Go to your school, get good grades. After you get good grades, that'll help you get into these AP classes or CP classes. You do well on your SATs, or I don't even know what kind of tests exist nowadays, but whatever, you get placed well. When that happens, then you get to go to a good college. You go to the good college, maybe get scholarships, whatever. Those good colleges, then you can finally move on to a good job. That good job, then maybe somebody will actually marry you, right? So that was the sort of tartib and that sayyid and that whole line that they're painting. Right? A lot of us were painted like that. So there's no discussion in that movement about spiritual journey. Would anybody ever say, look, you can go to school, and if you like it, great. If you don't like it, no problem. If you want to go up and, let's say, do some, I don't want to mention trades because it might be offensive to some, but let's just say what we'd call traditional blue collar work, where somebody's actually getting their hands dirty, which may not make as much money as, white collar sort of work. Would ever, as parents, we think of things like, son, daughter, if you even go to that, as long as you are closer to Allah through it, then go ahead, it's fine. Most of that wouldn't occur to us, right? We wouldn't be thinking in those lines. So the tarbiyah initially, we have to start and figure out, okay, are we setting it up for this objective of higher education? And now this higher education, what is that? This is this qurb, right? This closest to Allah. Allah is ilm and nothing but ilm, right? This is the source of knowledge and He is all knowledge. And everything that we understand and learn should be directed back towards Him. Is that the sort of model that we're going for? Or again, is it just used as a tool and a wasila for making money, starting a family, and that's it? Because if it's the former, if it's the one that's just the capitalistic mindset, then this higher education system, the Islamic version, it's non-existent. It's not going to work. It won't enter into our minds. It's not going to happen. When we can start early on with children and say, look, whether it's this kind of simple ways we talk about nurture or nature, but, look at Allah all around you. Do you want to know the depths that Allah's created? Well, it's in mathematics. It's in these, physical sciences. It's in the social sciences. It's in everything. And child, maybe if they're inquisitive, they want to learn more and more. Okay, well, there's legal rules that surround this as well too. All of these things are interconnected. How far do you want to take this? So when that is inculcated and started off with children early on in the household, and ideally they're seeing their parents do the same thing too. Right? When they always say, when you see a parent read and ask questions and say, I don't know, the child will be able to repeat the same thing too. Say, okay, my dad, my mom, they're researchers, they ask questions, they say, I don't know, then that means there's always this infinite journey to something higher. So I'm going to follow in those footsteps. Okay. So that's, again, just some quick words about tarbiyah in general. Now, okay, beyond the tarbiyah thing, the sort of second step, let's say the famous sort of tradition beyond the 0 to 7 phase. Now we're moving on to, let's say, the lower level of education, like schooling, early schooling. Right now, there's a huge debate, right? We all know about the LGBTQ stuff that's happening and all the sort of leftist stuff that happens in schools. Leave that aside for a second and just think more about their alternatives. Many are switching to homeschooling for those reasons. Many are switching to Islamic schooling. I know many who were switching to,
No, no, sorry.
Oh, I thought you raised your hand.
Quotes about around Islamic school.
Yeah, I'm glad you did that, yeah. Because that's exactly the point. And I've heard some, based on that, because of the quotes, they say, yeah, we looked at these so-called Islamic schools, which are, again, just schools for Muslim kids. We actually seem like we're better off dropping off in a private Christian school, because it seems like they're teaching these holistic, godly principles better than our own Muslim schools are doing, or Islamic schools are doing. So the way that we're thinking about these education systems also is going to matter. Again, I don't want to tell everybody how to raise your kids, what schools to send them in. I just want to get us to think about trying to set somebody up in the long term, right? What this higher education thing means. So in that respect now, as we're thinking about that, if you can recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Most of these schools, I've been around the country. I've seen all these, again, forgive me, attempts at Islamic schools, which again, I'm going to call schools for Muslims. It's basically the typical just westernized system, right? They'll grab onto Montessori or Waldorf. They'll grab something else. And then there's a Bismillah maybe at the beginning. There's a Dua Faraj maybe at the end. And they've named that an Islamic school. And maybe that's the most they can achieve. Allah knows their niyat and intention, fine. But is there much more achievable than there? Like, is that the limit of Islamic education? Like, is that actually Islamic education? Or is there a way that, no, all of these sciences, in the way that traditionally it has been done in the Muslim world, that there was no separation. There was no secular and then Islamic. It was all just manifestations of God, and everybody's just trying to understand that. Is that the way that it's being presented in these sort of schooling systems? One quick example. So normally you have, let's say, one class that'll talk about, let's say you're talking about the sun. Okay, this is the sun and, temperature, this is what the sun does, and orbiting stuff, planets, where they talk about it in astronomy for a kid. Okay, then they do that. Then maybe they have a separate fiqh class. And in the fiqh class, they'll talk about tahara and najasa. One of the things on the list will be, okay, water can purify, the sun can purify under certain conditions, whatever. So, and then maybe you have a separate Quran class where you're trying to get the kids to just learn and read Quran and memorize it. All of these things have been completely separated. Not intentionally, but in a sense, intentionally. There's another system where if an educator understands the interconnectedness of all this, let's say they start the class, again, this is just an example. They start the class with Surah Ash-Shams, reciting that. Then they say, let's talk about Ash-Shams, the sun. So now there's already Arabic and Quran being taught there. So, okay, what is the Shams there for? And maybe you have, again, for younger kids, you have some sort of physical activity. Maybe they're painting, letting it dry outside. Okay, how did this thing dry? Oh, it's the sun that did it. Like, okay, besides this, do you know what else it can dry? When something, for example, becomes najis and it's attached, the sun can actually purify something that's najis too. You've just made a whole Islamic sort of curriculum on one concept of the sun without having to separate it into separate classes. So now the mind of a child too is that, okay, the sun is like that. That means the moon is like that. That means the earth is like that. That means the orb, every single thing now is going to have this interconnectedness. When these classes are separated, then you're already separating somebody and thinking that these things are all disconnected from God, or that there's an Islamic sense of knowledge, which is like fiqh and usul and whatever the Islamic sciences are, Quran. And then there's the sciences that are separate, which, again, in the back of their mind, that's the one that gets you a job and makes you money. So I want to kind of end here because I want to give time to everybody else. I think I'll stop here because I think I'd rather more discussion happen from there. So I'm going to end on a weird note, but hopefully it's gotten you to think, and then we'll see what the other scholars can add on from that. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.